"Hey, Dad, do you miss me?" Those were the first words out of my mouth as I stepped into the living room of my family's New Year reunion, a room packed shoulder to shoulder with people who had not spoken my name in 10 years. The music stopped first, then the conversations, then the breathing. Every head turned toward me as if someone had broken a long-standing spell, and for a moment, no one seemed to know whether they were looking at a ghost or a mistake that had finally come home to collect. I saw my dad's face before anyone else reacted. He went pale in a way I had not seen since I was a teenager, a kind of drained panic that spread through him like cold water. Olivia stood beside him, my golden sister, dressed perfectly, as always. Her hand froze halfway through lifting a glass of champagne. Her eyes landed on me, wide, sharp, calculating. She did not blink. No one blinked. Before anyone could speak, the television behind them flickered bright. The financial news segment resumed after a commercial break, and the anchor's voice cut through the silence. Breaking headline: Young millionaire entrepreneur Mia Hayden, founder of Horizon AgriLogic. It was live, and there was my face on the screen, smiling politely in a studio in Dallas, wearing the same soft gray blazer I had chosen only 2 weeks earlier. Same eyes. Same voice, same woman, different last name. The room split in two. Half of them stared at the TV. Half stared at me. Some did both, flicking back and forth as if waiting for a punchline. My dad was the one who broke first. His voice cracked. No. Just that one word. No, as if refusing to accept that the daughter he had declared dead was standing 3 feet away from him, breathing, watching him fall apart with the truth, only now catching up to him. I took another step inside. The hardwood floor didn't even creak. I had imagined this moment 100 times, but nothing compared to hearing the air drain out of a house that once held every memory of who I used to be. And maybe you're listening to this wondering what you would have done in my showed place. The truth, at least my version of it, began long before this reunion. Before the cameras, before the money, before a different last name gave me a life that once felt impossible. It began in a small house on the edge of Cedar Ridge, Iowa, in the middle of a fight I didn't start, but somehow became the price of. Dad finally found his voice as I stood in front of him at the reunion. He whispered my name once, then again, louder this time, as if testing whether I was real. Someone in the room dropped a fork. Someone else gasped. Olivia tried to speak, but nothing came out except a thin breath that made her chest rise too quickly. She knew this day might come. She just never thought it would come this soon, or this publicly. I didn't move. I let them all look. The people who mourned me, the ones who lied about me, the ones who carried casseroles into church halls for a girl they believed had died in a storm off Highway 20. The ones who had comforted my dad and sister, not knowing that grief is easy to fake if the reward is large enough. But the truth doesn't need permission to walk back into a room. It only needs timing. And mine was perfect. A man I barely recognized whispered, "Isn't that Mia on TV right now?" Another answered, "But she's dead. They said she died." I went to her funeral. Then someone else, closer to me, said a different thing entirely. "That's her. The real her." David began shaking his head like a man drowning, unable to remember how air works. He wasn't used to pressure he couldn't control, not on job sites, not in front of church committees, and certainly not in front of the family he had kept carefully curated for so many years. His world had always stayed exactly as he wanted. Until now. I looked at him and said it again, not louder, not softer, just with the calm of someone who no longer needs anything from the people who once held everything. "Hey, Dad, miss me?" He stumbled backward into a chair, gripping the table like he needed it to stay upright. His lips moved, but his voice didn't. Olivia reached toward him, but even she wasn't sure whether she was comforting him or steadying herself. The television kept playing. They showed a shot of me walking through the Horizon warehouse, laughing with the team, carrying crates of produce, the irony thick enough to taste. My dad hated farming. He always said people who worked the land didn't understand class or ambition. He said the world belonged to builders and businessmen, not growers. That man had nearly thrown up the day he found out I fell in love with Luke Harper, the son of the local farmer. On the screen behind him, I was smiling. In front of him, I wasn't. People whispered. A woman near the fireplace murmured that she didn't understand. Someone else asked why her obituary had said otherwise. A cousin squinted as if trying to match the person in front of him with the girl he vaguely remembered from childhood. One older uncle folded his arms and muttered that there would be hell to pay for, whatever this was. I didn't rush anything. I didn't need to. Truth is heavy. It sinks slowly and sinks deep. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't shake. I said you told the world I died, and you never expected to see me again. He swallowed hard. His throat clicked. He looked at me the way a man looks at the last thing he thought he had buried. He whispered again, no. He said it the way a man says no to fate, not a lie, as if refusing reality could undo it. But reality was sitting in his living room, with my coat still on. That was the moment I felt something quiet shift inside me. Not anger, not triumph, something colder. Recognition, maybe. Or distance, like seeing the outline of a childhood home long after the house has burned down. My voice softened. It had to. The truth needed a steady tone. I said to him, "Do you remember the night you told me to get out?" "You're no longer my child." I remember every word. The room went completely still. Even the television seemed quieter, although the anchor was still talking about market volatility and supply chain leadership. That last part was what made Olivia flinch. She knew exactly what I built. She knew exactly what I became after the night he pushed me out the door and told me that loving the wrong person made me unworthy of carrying his name. I glanced around the room, letting the silence stretch just long enough that even the guests who had pretended not to know about the rumors now felt them close in. There is a special kind of hush that falls when truth enters a space that has lived on lies. I had heard it only once before, on the night everything changed. But that night wasn't tonight. Not yet. If I want paper, I needed to start at the beginning. The real beginning. The part no one ever heard because no one ever asked. I drew in a slow breath, letting the tension settle before I stepped back in time. My name is Mia Hayden now, but when I was 18, when my hair was still long and my voice still trembled whenever he raised his voice, my name looked very different. Back then, I still believed that family meant something. I believed that love could soften a man like my dad, and that choosing my own heart wouldn't cost me everything. I believed that the world was cruel sometimes, but my home would never be the place. That broke me. I was wrong. The night he threw me out, Iowa was already deep in winter. I can still feel the sting of the cold when I open the door, the weight of my bag in my hand, the sound of his voice behind me calling me a disappointment, a girl who had chosen dirt and tractors over legacy and pride. He said I had humiliated him by falling for a farm boy. He said I was no longer his daughter. And when the door shut behind me, it shut loud enough to change the rest of my life. I let that memory settle in the room as I looked at him again, not expecting an apology, not offering forgiveness, just setting the record straight. Because before anyone could understand why I came back, why I stood there in front of the people who had believed I was buried in the ground, they needed to hear how I disappeared in the first place. So I lifted my chin, exhaled once, and began. It happened the night he told me to get out. That was the moment everything in my life broke in two. If I am honest with myself, the beginning started months earlier. On a warm afternoon at the Harper farm, the day Luke first handed me a basket of tomatoes and told me that real work leaves dirt under your nails. I had laughed then, brushing the soil from my palms, not realizing that tiny moment would set off an earthquake inside my family. Back then, I was 18, old enough to know what I wanted, but still young enough to believe that desire alone could shield me from consequences. Luke had a quiet steadiness to him, the kind that made you feel the world could slow down if you stood next to him long enough. He worked sunrise to sunset with a calm pride I rarely saw in Cedar Ridge. He respected the land the way my dad respected his blueprints, and somehow, Those two worlds were never meant to mix. I remember coming home that day, humming under my breath, hair still smelling faintly of hay. Olivia was in the kitchen, arranging something for a club event. Everything immaculate, because she never did anything halfway. She paused when I came in, nose wrinkling before she even looked at me. She asked if I had been rolling in fields again. I said no, just helping out. She shook her head the way she always did when she thought I was choosing the wrong version of myself. Dad walked in right as Olivia asked if I had seen Luke. I said yes, without thinking. He stopped mid-step. The shift in the room was instant, like air tightening before a storm breaks. He asked what I was doing with that boy, and tried to keep his voice even, but it was stretched thin. I told him Luke was kind, that he made me feel seen, that there was nothing wrong with spending time with someone who actually listened when I talked. He did not like that answer. He told me people in Cedar Ridge talked about the Carter family, that there were standards we were expected to hold. He said farming was not a life, it was a sentence. He said I was too close to a world he considered beneath us. He even tried to soften his tone for a moment and said he wanted better for me, as if choosing love meant throwing my future away. I remember Mom stepping in then, wiping her hands on a dish towel, trying so hard to place herself between us without making it look like she was. Choosing sides. She told him that I was young and figuring things out, that she herself had once talked to boys who did not meet her parents' standards. She touched his arm gently, but his shoulders were already squared, jaw set. He asked me if I understood how embarrassed he felt when people at church whispered that his daughter was spending her weekends at a farm. I told him that the only people who cared were the ones who had nothing else to talk about. He shot back that perception was everything. I told him love mattered more than perception. He did not agree. That was the first real fight about Luke, but it was not the biggest. The biggest came 2 weeks later, after he caught me lying about where I had been. I had told him I was in town running errands. In truth, I had spent the entire afternoon helping the Harpers repair a fence after. A storm knocked down part of it. He drove by on his way home and saw my car in their driveway. That night, the house felt too quiet. He waited until after dinner before calling me into the living room. Mom sat in the corner, twisting her wedding ring, already knowing the conversation would end badly. Olivia stood near the doorway, pretending she wasn't listening, even though she absolutely was. He asked if I had lied to him. I said yes. I asked if it mattered. That was the wrong thing to say. He told me he could accept honesty. He could even accept stubbornness. What he could not accept was his daughter choosing a life he had climbed his way out of. He reminded me again that his business had taken decades of work, that he had spent countless nights away from home to build something only a few people in town could ever hope to match. He said I was throwing away the opportunities he had fought for. I told him I never asked him to fight for my future in the way he imagined it. I told him I was allowed to figure things out on my own. He said that kind of talk was childish. I told him dismissing my feelings was cruel. His voice got louder. Mine did too. Mom stepped forward at one point and asked both of us to breathe, but he waved her off. He told me the Harpers were not our kind of people. I asked him what kind of people we were supposed to be. He said the kind that others look up to. I told him that sounded lonely. His jaw tightened again, and the argument spun in circles until neither of us could hear the other. I kept seeing Luke despite the tension. We spent evenings sitting on the back of his truck looking at open fields, talking about everything from school to the things we feared to the things we hoped for. He told me once that he would never accept him, and I told him he did not need his approval. I believed that then. I believed my own feelings were enough to carry us through any kind of resistance, but love does not cancel out power, and he held all of it. The night before everything exploded, he found a picture of me and Luke in my backpack. It was nothing dramatic, just the two of us standing in the barn doorway, laughing. Luke had his arm around my shoulders. My hair was a mess. We both looked happy. He came into my room that night holding the picture, asking if I understood how this would look if anyone saw it. I told him no one cared. He told me that I was naive for thinking that. I told him judgment was his problem, not mine. He asked if I was in love. I said I thought I might be. He stared at me so long, I began to wonder if he had even heard me. Finally, he said that love without a future was foolish. I said his idea of the future did not match mine. There was no middle ground. The next morning was the day he told me to get out. I was in the kitchen making coffee when he walked in. He set his jaw and said firmly that he would not allow me to destroy everything he built. He said if I insisted on staying involved with someone like Luke, then I needed to pack my things and leave his house. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The coldness in his tone was enough. Mom stepped between us, pleading with him to slow down, to talk this through, to give me room, to grow, reminding him that love does not always start in the places we expect. But the more she tried, the more resolute he became. I could do it on my own time and on my own dime. I asked him if he really meant it. He said he did. I asked him if choosing someone he disapproved of meant I was no longer his daughter. He looked me directly in the eyes and said that if I walked out that door on my own terms, then yes, I was choosing against this family. That was the moment something inside him shut. I still remember the way Mom gasped softly, like she was hearing the words but refusing to accept their meaning. Olivia did not say a thing. She only watched, waiting to see how the new hierarchy would settle. I looked at him then and saw no hesitation. He had already decided who he wanted me to be, and it was not who I actually was. I think that was the moment I realized love in that house was conditional. It was based on obedience. It was based on appearances. It was never based on me. I went upstairs and packed a bag. Mom followed me, trembling, asking me to stay, asking me to give him time, asking me to make this easier, begging me not to leave the way she knew I was going to leave. I hugged her and told her I loved her. She cried into my shoulder, but did not try to stop me again. When I came back downstairs, he was standing by the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable. He did not say another word. He simply stepped aside. I walked past him, crossed the threshold, and felt the cold air hit my face. It tasted like freedom and loss at the same time. That was the day everything broke. But I did not know then how far the cracks would spread. I did not know that leaving that house would be the last time I saw Mom alive. I did not know that he would later tell the entire world that I was gone. I only knew I had chosen myself over the image he demanded, and that choice would become the reason I disappeared from his life for what he believed would be forever. I did not look back at him when I walked away. I only looked forward, not realizing yet that the cost of that step would follow me for years. The sky was already turning dark when I reached the end of our long driveway. I remember pausing for half a breath, not to reconsider my choice, but to feel the final weight of it. The house behind me was quiet. Too quiet for a place that had once held Christmas mornings and birthday candles. That silence told me everything I needed to know. No one was coming after me. I walked until my legs burned, until the cool evening air turned sharp in my lungs. Luke picked me up near the edge of town. I had called him on the way, and he had answered before the second ring. He did not ask questions. He just told me which road he was on. And when I saw his truck headlights cutting through the dark, relief washed over me like warm water. When I climbed inside, he glanced at the duffel bag on my lap. He knew what it meant. I told him my dad had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. Luke rested his hand on my knee and whispered that I was not alone. I wanted to believe him. I tried to. He took me to the Harper farm for the night. Mrs. Harper hugged me before I got through the front door. She had always been softer than my own mother, quick to cook something whenever someone looked upset. She brought out tea while I sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a blanket. No one peppered me with questions. They let me breathe. But by sunrise, I knew I could not stay there. The Harpers were kind, but my dad would see my staying there as an act of defiance, proof of everything he believed about me. I needed distance. Real distance, far enough away that his shadow would finally stretch too short to reach me. I told Luke at breakfast that I had to get out of Cedar Ridge entirely. He looked like someone had punched him in the chest, but he nodded. He asked where I would go. I said I did not know yet. He said he would follow me if I wanted him to. I told him he should finish school and help his parents. He told me love does not wait for convenient timing. Hearing that nearly broke me. But I knew dragging him into my fight with Dad would only wreck his life too. I kissed him goodbye in the driveway and told him I would be all right. I did not know if it was true. By noon, I was on a bus heading west with $100 in my pocket and no plan except to not become the girl everyone in Cedar Ridge expected me to be. I stared out the window at empty fields for hours, letting the motion of the bus carry me farther from that house, farther from everything I used to be. I reached Kansas City by late evening. The streets felt unfamiliar, but somehow safer than home. No one there knew my name. That anonymity made me feel like I could finally breathe. I found a cheap motel room, paid cash, and slept with the lights on. The next morning, I started the process of erasing the version of myself he believed he could control. The first step was changing my name. I chose Mia because it was the name my mom once whispered she loved back when she was pregnant, before he insisted on something more traditional. Using it felt like taking back the gentlest part of her, the part he could never touch. For my last name, I chose Hayden. It had no connection to him, no history tied to the house that pushed me out. It felt clean, steady, and entirely mine. Walking into that small office and signing Mia Hayden felt like closing a door behind me without needing to slam it. Making it legal involved paperwork, waiting rooms, fees, showing identification, and answering questions while pretending none of it hurt. Every time I wrote my birth name on a form, a small part of me went silent. But each time I wrote Mia Hayden, another part of me stood taller. Once my new documents were issued, I left Kansas City and headed toward Colorado. The farther I went, the less I felt tied to the person I had been. I took whatever work I could find. Shifts at a diner, weekend cleaning jobs, the kind of labor that left my hands sore and my feet aching. I learned to live paycheck to paycheck without fear because no one expected anything from me. The freedom inside that simplicity surprised me. Every night after work, I checked my phone even though I knew there would be no messages. He had always operated with finality. When he cut clean. Mom might have tried to reach out, but he controlled the phones, the bills, every aspect of that house. If she sent something, I never received it. I carried her soft voice with me anyway. Sometimes I imagined her walking into my room, sitting at the edge of my bed, telling me that things would settle if I gave them time. But no call ever came. No letter, no sign. Silence became the shape of our relationship. I accepted it because the alternative was heartbreak, and I could not afford that while building a new life. I lived in Denver for almost a year, then moved to Boulder, then to Fort Collins, always chasing opportunities that would bring in steadier income. Eventually, I got a job stocking shelves at a grocery store, then moved into working the registers. It was not glamorous, but it was honest, steady, and mine. No one cared who my father was. No one asked why I had left home. I existed on my own terms for the first time. During that period, I met a woman named Tessa, one of the few people who ever asked me about my past without pushing. I told her pieces of the truth, just enough to explain why holidays made me anxious and why my phone remained eerily quiet. She told me her parents had given her the silent treatment once for marrying someone they did not approve of. She said families could be cruel in slow, quiet ways. She was right. I kept expecting him to appear in some form, maybe through a private investigator or a lawyer, or even a guilt-ridden voicemail. But nothing happened. No one came looking for me. It took time for me to understand what that meant. They had not expected me to leave. They had counted on me folding under pressure and coming home to apologize. When I did not, they chose to pretend I no longer existed. The realization stung at first. Then it hardened into something else. Relief. If they no longer wanted me, I no longer had to pretend I wanted them. I buried the old version of myself and refused to resurrect her. Years passed quietly. I saved money. I learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. I worked. I slept. I built a small but steady existence. A few times I thought about reaching out to Mom, just to hear her voice, but the fear of him intercepting it always stopped me. I told myself she would find me if she truly wanted to. She never did. What I did not know then was that she had fallen sick only months after I left. The stress of the fights, the cold atmosphere of the house, the tension between her and him, All of it took its toll. I learned later she asked about me constantly, begged him to let her try contacting me, but he refused. He did not want to give me the satisfaction of knowing she still cared. She passed suddenly, and he never told me. At the time, I only felt a small shift, like a quiet thread in my chest snapping without explanation. I did not know why until years later, but that break shaped the next part of my journey. Right around the second anniversary of leaving home, I made one final decision that sealed my separation from that old life. I applied to a business certificate program at a community college. I figured if I was going to survive without him, I needed skills that could carry me forward. I chose entrepreneurship classes, unaware then how pivotal that single choice would be. Sitting in those classrooms, listening to instructors talk about market growth and calculated risks, something in me woke up. I realized I wanted more than survival. I wanted to build something meaningful, something no one could take from me, something he could never claim credit for. But my transformation, my reinvention, did not stop him from doing what he eventually did. While I was building a new life, one paycheck at a time, he was crafting a story that erased me completely. He wrote my absence into something final and irreversible. He told the world his daughter was gone. I did not know any of that yet, of course. All I knew was that my new name fit me better than my old one, and every day I stepped further away from the life he once dictated. Back then, I believed running was the end of the story. I had no idea it was only the beginning, and that the real reckoning would not come until years later, when the truth of what he had done finally made its way back to me. What I did not know then was that only a few months after I left Cedar Ridge, Mom's health began to fail. I learned all of this years later, in pieces, from people who hesitated even then to admit how bad things had become inside that house. But back at that time, while I was piecing my life together in Colorado, Mom was fading in a way no one bothered to tell me about. I remember waking up one morning in my small studio apartment in Denver. There was this sudden heaviness in my chest. Not physical, but emotional, like something had shifted without my permission. It left me uneasy for the rest of the day. I shook it off, telling myself it was just exhaustion from long hours at the grocery store. It never crossed my mind that the thread connecting me to my mother was unraveling, quietly, hundreds of miles away. From what I learned later, it started with her feeling tired all the time. She mentioned headaches that would not go away, dizzy spells that made her sit down suddenly in the middle of chores. David dismissed it as stress, told her she was overreacting, and Olivia apparently agreed. They said she needed rest. They said it would pass. It did not. Mom tried to make an appointment with a specialist, but he insisted the family doctor was enough. He did not want the town talking about sickness or weakness, especially not when the Carter name mattered so much to him. That part still hurts when I think about it, not because he loved his image more than his wife, but because she trusted him enough to delay the care she needed. She got worse, fast. Within weeks, she was barely eating and could not get through a day without lying down. One afternoon, she fainted in the kitchen and hit her head. That finally pushed him to take her to the hospital, but by then, her condition had already progressed too far. She spent several days there while tests were run, but even then, no one thought to call me. No one even tried. Not a phone call, not a text, not a message through a mutual friend. Nothing. The day she passed, I was making lattes at a small cafe where I had picked up extra hours. The radio was playing quietly, people chatting softly, the steam wand hissing in the background. I remember feeling cold suddenly, so cold I had to step into the back room for a moment. I wrapped my arms around myself and breathed slowly. I told myself I would call Mom soon, even though I had not spoken to her in months. I told myself she probably missed me. I told myself she was still there. She was not. He arranged the funeral quickly. A private service at the church she had attended since before I was born. The same pews, the same pastor, the same hymns she used to hum in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. The only thing missing was me. Gold-framed pictures of her were placed on a long table near the front, and the program listed her as a devoted wife and mother of two. My name was printed beside Olivia's, even though I was not there, even though no one had bothered to tell me she was gone. Even though he had already begun talking about me as if I no longer existed. I was told much later that a few relatives had asked him if he had notified me. He told them I had made my choice. He said I did not want to be part of the family anymore. He said I would not have come even if he had tried contacting me. People believed him, or maybe they pretended to because it was easier than confronting the truth. Olivia stood next to him the entire time, her expression composed, eyes dry. Someone told me she looked proud in a strange way, as if taking on Mom's place beside him was something she had been waiting for. I do not know which part hurts more, that they did not tell me, or that they used my absence to craft a story that suited them. What I remember is that after that day in the cafe, the heaviness in my chest never fully went away. Something felt off, an uneasiness I could not explain. At the time, I tried to ignore it. I kept working, kept saving money, kept pushing myself to finish the business courses I had signed up for. But the silence from Cedar Ridge grew louder with each passing month. Around the time I finished my first semester, I asked myself again whether I should reach out to Mom. I even picked up the phone once, thumb hovering over the call button. But fear stopped me. Fear that he would answer. Fear that he would track my number. Fear that he would find a way to pull me back into that life. So I put the phone down and convinced myself there would be time later. There was not. It was almost a year after her death when I learned the truth. A distant aunt, someone who had always liked me more than she liked my dad, tracked me down through an old friend. She called me out of the blue, and her first words were apologizing because she thought I already knew. When she realized I did not, her voice cracked. She told me she assumed my dad had contacted me. When she learned he had not, she whispered that she should have called me herself. I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment after that call, legs numb, head spinning. I was not angry at the aunt. I was angry at myself for believing silence meant peace rather than finality. I was angry at him for deciding I did not deserve to know my own mother's final days. And I was angry at Olivia for standing beside him at that funeral, pretending nothing was wrong. That was the moment something inside me changed. Before that call, part of me still held on to the hope that one day the damage could be undone, that maybe he would soften, or Olivia would grow up and see the toxicity for what it was. Maybe Mom and I would reconnect when things settled. But after learning the truth, that hope died too. I started asking questions, trying to piece together what had happened. Every answer pushed me further from forgiveness. I learned he had told relatives I was unstable, that I had run off with no intention of returning, that I had cut all ties, and made it clear I wanted nothing to do with the family. No one questioned him. No one pushed back. It was easier for them to accept the narrative than search for the truth. As weeks passed, that uneasy feeling grew sharper. Like Mom's death was not the final blow, but the beginning of a deeper unraveling. Sometimes I caught myself replaying moments from childhood, searching for signs that he had always been capable of cutting people out so completely. The signs were there. I had just been too young to see them. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Mom's death had given him something he had not expected. Freedom. Without her, there was no one to question him, no one to balance his pride, no one to soften his harsher decisions. He had lost his wife, but he had also lost the last person who would have insisted he treat me like a daughter instead of an inconvenience. And Olivia stepped into the empty space Mom left behind. Too willingly, too comfortable, as if she had waited her entire life to be the center of his world. That realization made my stomach twist, because if he was willing to erase me from Mom's final days, what else was he capable of erasing? I did not know yet, but soon, very soon, I would begin to see cracks forming in the version of the story he had told them, world. Cracks big enough for the truth to slip through. Cracks big enough to change everything I thought I understood about what had happened in that house. The final thread holding me back from full resentment had snapped. Whatever came next would no longer feel like betrayal. It would feel like clarity. And clarity was its own kind of freedom. I did not know yet, but soon, very soon, I would begin to see cracks forming in the version of the story he had told them, world. Cracks big enough for the truth to slip through. Cracks big enough to change everything I thought I understood about what had happened in that house. The moment everything shifted started quietly. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening in my apartment in Fort Collins. I had just finished a long shift and was sitting on my old thrift store couch with a microwaved dinner on my lap. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the glow of the lamp in the corner, the feeling of being tired in a way that settled into my bones. Nothing about that night hinted at the storm waiting for me on my phone. I was scrolling without thinking, just moving through the usual noise of social media, until a message popped up from an old classmate named Jordan. We had not spoken since high school, and even then our conversations were the kind that happened only because our lockers were close. His message was short. Just a single line asking if it was really me. At first, I frowned, confused. Then he sent a photo, a screenshot. I tapped it, and the world seemed to pull away from under me. It was a memorial post. My face stared back at me. An old school picture from when I was 17. My hair was straighter then, my smile a little unsure, but there was no mistaking it. Above the photo was a caption that made my heart slam against my rib. In loving memory of our daughter, Mia Carter, 1994 to 2012. Gone too soon. Forever in our hearts. I froze. Completely. For a few seconds, the room fell silent. The air heavy, pressing against my chest. I blinked, thinking it had to be some cruel mistake. Maybe it was a hoax. Maybe someone had made a fake post to get attention. But then I saw who had shared it. Olivia. Her profile photo was the same polished, perfect image she had always presented to the world. Her caption under the memorial was simple, almost practiced. Missing you every day, sis. I sat there staring, unable to breathe. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the phone down on the table. When I picked it up again, I reread the dates. 1994 to 2012. The year I left home. The year Mom got sick. The year my existence became inconvenient. My eyes drifted to the comments under the post. People from Cedar Ridge, some I had gone to school with, others I barely remembered, all writing things like "rest in peace," and "she was such a sweet girl," and "heaven gained an angel." My stomach twisted as I scrolled. Then I saw something that made the entire world tilt. He had replied to several comments, thanking people for their prayers. Not a generic message, personal ones. He thanked Mrs. Perry from church for dropping off flowers. He thanked the pastor for leading the service. He thanked an old neighbor for thinking of the family during such a difficult time. A difficult time. The difficult time of losing me. Except I was not dead. I kept scrolling until I found a post shared by the Cedar Ridge Community Church. It was a link to a recorded memorial service. A full service, complete with hymns, readings, and a eulogy. I clicked on it, unable to stop myself, even as my fingers trembled. The video opened with soft organ music. The camera panned across the sanctuary. Dozens of people filled the pews, all dressed in black. Faces I had known all my life. Faces I had once hugged at Christmas. Face who believed they were grieving me. Then the camera moved to the front where my dad stood behind the pulpit. He looked older, more somber, but composed, like a man bearing tragedy with dignity. He began to speak, talking about losing a daughter, about the pain of letting go, about the suddenness of the accident. The accident. That word caught my breath. He said I had been traveling and a car had struck me. He said the news had come without warning. He said I had been taken too soon. Taken too soon. I pressed a hand to my mouth as nausea rolled through me. He spoke with emotion in his voice, but not grief. Almost a practiced sorrow, the kind that sounded right, but felt hollow. Mom had already been gone by then, so she was not in the frame. Instead, Olivia stood next to him, holding his arm, tears streaming down her cheeks. They looked like the perfect grieving family. The betrayal hit so deeply I felt myself sway. I clicked away from the video, but the image of that sanctuary full of people believing I was gone would not leave my mind. My phone lit up with another message from Jordan. He wrote that he had stumbled across the memorial while looking up old classmates and thought it was strange because he could have sworn he saw someone who looked like me in Denver last year. He asked again if it was really me. I did not answer. I went down a rabbit hole then, unable to stop myself. I found posts from relatives, from old teachers, from people who had barely known me. There were pictures of flowers placed at the church, pictures of candles, a photo of a plaque placed on a wooden bench outside the community center, with my name engraved on it. A permanent reminder of a girl who did not exist anymore. And the worst part was that no one questioned it. Not one person had written anything like, "Are you sure?" Or, "Did anyone contact her?" Or, "Does this make sense?" They accepted his version of the truth without hesitation, as if it had always been expected that I would disappear, as if I had been a fragile thing destined to break. I closed my eyes and leaned back on the couch, but the image of that memorial would not fade. I pictured my dad standing there, delivering that eulogy with a steady voice. I pictured Olivia wiping her tears, basking in the attention. Step into the role of the surviving daughter. Something cold spread through my chest then. Deeper than anger, heavier than pain. This was not just abandonment. This was erased. He had chosen to remove me from reality. Not temporarily, not symbolically, but permanently. He did not want the world to wonder where I was or why I had left. He wanted the world to forget I had ever existed in the first place. That realization was the fracture point. The moment I understood that whatever happened after I walked out that door had nothing to do with grief or misunderstanding. It was intentional, deliberate, a rewriting of the past so he would never have to admit his own failure. I thought about Mom then, about how she would have screamed if she had known what he had done, about how she would have fought to keep my name alive, but she was gone, and her absence gave him the freedom he needed to reshape the narrative without challenge. I spent hours that night looking through every post, every comment, every record I could find. I found the church bulletin listing me as deceased. I found the announcement in the local newspaper archived online. I found a dedication in a Christmas program referencing me as the girl the town had lost too soon. A whole community had mourned me, and not one person thought to question whether my disappearance had been convenient for him, whether the timing was suspicious, whether the story made sense. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling, my pulse pounding in my ears. It felt like standing outside my own life while everyone else attended a performance about a girl I used to be. That night, for the first time since leaving Cedar Ridge, I cried for the person I once was, not because she was gone, but because she had been buried without consent, without truth, without dignity, without a body. He had replaced me with a story that suited him, and everyone believed it. When the sun finally rose the next morning, something in me had hardened. I realized that if he had gone this far, you had crafted an entire funeral around a lie, then the truth behind it was far darker than I wanted to imagine. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had not just been cut off. I had been erased. Now I need to understand why. That thought stayed with me through the night, pulsing like a bruise I could not stop pressing. By morning, the shock had cooled into something sharper, something focused. If he had staged a funeral, if he had written me out of existence, there had to be a reason deeper than pride or shame. Erasing someone takes effort. It takes intention. It takes motivation. So I sat at my small kitchen table with a notebook, a pen, and a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I wrote one question at the top of the page: punishment, control. But the one that kept circling back, the one that grew heavier the more I thought about it, was money. When he made extreme decisions, there was always a financial angle hiding beneath the surface. He tied worth to wealth and loyalty to legacy. If removing me from the picture protected something, or added to something, or prevented some kind of loss, then the truth would be somewhere in the records I had never been allowed to see. I needed documents. I needed facts. I needed someone who knew how to decode the kind of mess only a man like him could create. That was how I ended up sitting across from Rachel in a small coffee shop on the north side of Fort Collins a few days later. We met because a coworker of mine mentioned her cousin was a lawyer who specialized in insurance disputes and estate irregularities. I did not know what that meant, but I knew it was closer to the kind of help I needed than anything else I had. Rachel arrived in a navy blazer, jeans, and hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked approachable, but there was an alertness in her eyes, the kind that comes from years of watching people lie across conference tables. She introduced herself, ordered a tea, and took out a notepad. She asked what brought me in today. I hesitated for a moment, wondering how strange my story would sound out loud, but then I laid it out in pieces. The memorial post, the funeral video, the comments from people back home, the fact that I was very much alive. Rachel did not interrupt, but her eyebrows lifted more than once, especially when I mentioned the church bulletin listing me as deceased. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and let out a slow breath. She said she had heard of estranged families pretending someone was dead socially, meaning they told friends someone had passed to avoid awkward questions. But she had never heard of a full memorial service without an actual death certificate. I told her that was exactly what frightened me, because he would never risk public humiliation unless something was pushing him. She asked about my mom, about when she passed, about whether she had life insurance. That question hit me in a way I was not prepared for. I had not thought about insurance. Mom had worked her entire life. She had a policy through her job. He handled the paperwork. I had never seen a single document. Rachel immediately focused on that. She said life insurance often requires beneficiaries to verify identities. If one child is listed and then becomes marked as deceased, insurance companies rely on documentation from the family to update the payout distribution. I asked what that meant. Rachel said bluntly that if my dad declared me dead, he could claim that my portion of whatever Mom left behind would no longer go to me. It would then be divided among remaining beneficiaries. Usually that meant the spouse and any living children. My dad and Olivia. I felt a cold rush move through my body. It made too much sense. Too much. Rachel grabbed her laptop and asked for my birth name. Then she asked for my mom's name, her birth year, and the state where she had worked. She did not promise results, but she said many insurance policies are housed in national databases or public claim archives. As she typed, my pulse thudded in my ears. After a few minutes, she turned the screen slightly in my direction. There it was. A life insurance policy under my mom's name, issued in 2010 through her employer. A standard policy. Nothing extravagant, but a sizable amount for a family in Cedar Ridge. The payout listed beneficiaries as my dad, me, and Olivia, except next to my name was a notation in red. Deceased, 2012. Rachel clicked deeper into the digital file. Another page opened with distribution information, because one beneficiary was reported as deceased. The payout had been divided between him and Olivia. I stared at the screen so long, my eyes burned. If the fake funeral had been jarring, this was something else, something calculated. He had not only erased me emotionally and socially, he had taken what my mom intended for me, the part of her future she hoped would support mine, all because he decided I did not deserve it. Rachel looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and focus. She said that if a false declaration of death was used to adjust a policy payout, that could fall under insurance fraud. But the problem was proving intent. Insurance companies trust information from families. The responsibility falls on them to notify agencies if something changes. I told her my dad had not only lied, he had staged an entire community service for me. He had told relatives and neighbors I was gone. He had stuck to that story for years. Rachel nodded slowly. She said that consistency was a double-edged sword. It made his lie appear credible on the surface, but it also showed pattern. And pattern mattered in fraud investigations. I asked what someone like me could do. She said the first step was gathering everything. The memorial posts, the funeral video, the church bulletin, screenshots of comments, anything that created a timeline of the narrative he had constructed. Then she said we needed the documentation filed with the insurance company. Someone had to submit verification of my death for them to process the new payout. I told her he would have handled all of that. She said in that case, if the signature or the attestations were his, the situation shifted. A fraud case would no longer rest on rumor. It would rest on whatever he submitted. I felt overwhelmed, but also strangely clear. For the first time since seeing that memorial post, I had something resembling direction. We ordered refills. Rachel asked if I had ever seen Mom's will. I told her no. He handled all legal matters. He rarely let Mom sign anything without hovering. She asked if I had any reason to believe Mom would exclude me. I laughed. Mom loved me fiercely. Her last whispered words before I left were, to be safe. Come home someday. She would never have cut me out. Not willingly. Rachel nodded and said quietly that sometimes the dead cannot defend themselves, so the responsibility falls to the living. I felt my throat tighten. I pictured Mom smiling in the kitchen, humming while she stirred a pot of soup. I pictured her hand brushing my hair behind my ear. I pictured her pleading with him on the day he kicked me out. She deserved better than to have her last act of protection twisted into something he could benefit from. Rachel pushed a sheet of paper toward me. It was a list of what she needed from me. Proof of identity, under both my old and new names. Any old letters or photos that showed I had been alive after the supposed date of death. Contact information for my aunt who had called to tell me about Mom's passing. Records from the cafe where I'd worked that year. Anything that contradicted the timeline he had created. I told her I could gather all of it. She looked at me seriously then and said this would not be easy, that the emotional cost might be higher than the legal one. She asked if I was sure I wanted to open this door. For a long moment I sat there, hands wrapped around my cup, feeling the heat seep into my palms. Then I thought of Mom's face. I thought of that wooden bench outside the community center with my name carved into it. I thought of people lighting candles at a service for a girl who was not dead. I thought of my dad and Olivia standing in front of everyone, letting them believe I was gone, and I felt something inside me shift from pain to purpose. I told Rachel yes. I told her I was done letting silence protect the wrong people. I told her I was ready to look at every dark corner my father had created. She studied my face for a moment, nodded, and said, "Then we follow the money." Over the next several days, I gathered everything she asked for. I was surprised by how many pieces of my old life I still had tucked away in drawers and boxes. Photos from my first apartment, receipts from coffee shops in Denver, note from friends at jobs I had taken over the years. I found an old phone filled with time-stamped messages to a coworker, all from after the date he claimed I died. Rachel reviewed each one carefully. Every document, every screenshot, every digital breadcrumb that proved I was alive. As she built the file, the truth became harder to ignore. He had declared me dead not because he believed I was gone, but because it was convenient. He wanted full control of Mom's insurance money. He wanted everything in his name and Olivia's. He wanted a simple narrative that spared him from explaining why his daughter had walked away from him. And he thought I would never find out. By the time Rachel closed her laptop and told me we had enough to take the next step, I felt something different settle inside me. Not just grief, not just betrayal, but resolve. She asked if I was ready to confront what came next. I told her that for the first time in 10 years, I was not afraid of my father. She smiled faintly and said, "Then we began." As I walked out of the cafe that evening, the air felt colder than usual, but it also felt clearer, sharper, like the beginning of something long overdue. He had buried me without a body. Now it was time to dig up the truth. Leaving the cafe that evening, I felt the air shift around me, crisp and certain, like the moment before a storm finally breaks. For years I had lived quietly, slipping through life without attracting attention. Believing invisibility kept me safe. But now the truth stood wide open, and the more I looked at it, the stronger I felt. If my dad had taken the time to bury me on paper, then I would take the time to resurrect myself, on my own terms. The next chapter of my life did not start with some dramatic breakthrough. It started with work. Long hours, sleepless nights, mistakes, patience, and a stubbornness I had inherited from the very man who tried to erase me. The business idea came from something simple. During my shifts stocking shelves at the grocery store, I saw how much produce came in late or spoiled because distribution channels were inefficient. Farmers often struggled to get competitive pricing. Small stores struggled to get consistent supply. Everything felt too slow, too wasteful, too outdated. And somewhere in that mess, a spark caught. Maybe because it reminded me of all those afternoons on the Harper farm. Maybe because he hated farming so much, he considered it beneath the Carter name. Or maybe because life has a strange way of circling back to the things we once loved. Whatever the reason, The idea stayed with me, so I began researching agricultural logistics, market demand, and distribution gaps. I took night classes. I met with local growers. I volunteered at co-ops. Slowly, something honest and steady took shape. Horizon Agrilogics, a platform that connected regional farmers directly with independent grocers, restaurants, and small distributors. It streamlined ordering, reduced waste, stabilized prices, and gave farmers predictable income. It was not glamorous, but it mattered. It was work that helped people who rarely had advocates in boardrooms or conference halls. I chose Horizon because it felt like the opposite of his world. He built things meant to impress from the outside. I wanted to build something that mattered from the inside. Within 2 years, the company grew enough for me to leave my cashier job. We got seed funding from a small Colorado investment group. I hired a team of 4, then 8, then 12. We opened a modest office. Nothing fancy, just an old brick building near the rail line with uneven floors and windows that rattled during storms. But it felt like home. By the time I turned 30, Horizon was featured in sustainability publications, then regional news, then national agriculture journals. People liked the story of a woman who built something practical in a world obsessed with flashy tech. I never talked publicly about my past, never mentioned Cedar Ridge, never spoke about him. My success was not meant to prove anything to him. It was meant to free me from him. But life has a way of connecting threads you think are separate forever. When a producer from a major financial network reached out requesting an interview, my first instinct was to decline. I did not want cameras. I did not want attention. But my team insisted it would help our expansion efforts, and deep down, I knew they were right. So I agreed. 2 weeks later, I was in Denver, sitting in a quiet studio while makeup artists gently brushed powder over my cheeks. The host reviewed her notes. My heart raced. Not because I feared the interview, but because a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that visibility could bring echoes from the past. Still, I went through with it. The interview aired the next morning, a special on innovative women in agriculture. The segment introduced me by my legal name, the name I had chosen myself, Mia Hayden. The camera panned over the Horizon office, the farms we partnered with, and the markets we supplied. They played a short clip of me laughing with a group of women from a local growers collective. Then the host asked how it felt to create a company with roots in agriculture, given that so many people underestimate the industry. I smiled and said that the world underestimates the wrong things all the time, and it never ends well. After the interview aired, messages flooded my inbox. Old coworkers, new investors, community members. My team celebrated with cupcakes and sparkling cider. We laughed. We took photos. We talked about the next milestones. It felt good, warm, earned. But that same afternoon, something else happened. A ping on my phone. A notification from an old Cedar Ridge community group I had been added to years earlier and forgotten to leave. Someone had shared the interview. Not someone random, someone from back home. And the caption said, "Look at this. She looks just like Mia." My stomach tightened. I clicked the post. Comment after comment popped up. Is that really her? I thought she died. Did her dad know? How is this possible? Why would Olivia lie? The questions grew louder, piling on top of one another like falling bricks. My past had cracked open. And that was not the only thing happening that week. A day after the interview went viral, I received a message from my aunt, the same aunt who had once been brave enough to tell me about Mom's passing. She said there would be a family reunion in Cedar Ridge in 5 days. My dad would be there. Olivia would be there. Extended relatives, too. She wrote that she thought I deserved to know, and that maybe it was time. Time for what, I did not know. But the idea of that reunion lingered in my thoughts like a shadow. That evening, I told Rachel about the interview, the messages, and the reunion. She listened quietly, fingers tapping against her mug as she thought. Then she said something that made everything stand still. If they are already seeing you on television, the story has begun to unravel on its own. Then showing up exactly when they least expect you is not confrontation. It is truth meeting them at the door. I asked if she thought it was wise. She said revenge did not always require shouting. Sometimes it only required presence and timing. I lay awake that night replaying the interview, imagining the moment he might have seen my face on a national broadcast. The shock, the fear, the realization that the daughter he declared dead was alive, successful, visible, a woman he could no longer control. For 10 years, he had shaped a narrative where I disappeared quietly. Now that narrative trembled under the weight of reality. By dawn, the decision felt clear. I was not going to avoid the reunion. I was going to walk straight into it. But not recklessly, strategically. If the truth was going to surface, I wanted it to land exactly where it belonged, at his feet. In front of the relatives he had deceived, in front of the community he had manipulated, in front of the sister who had stood at his side while he erased me. I spent the next few days preparing, not emotionally, but practically. I gathered documents Rachel had compiled, screenshots, dates, copies of Mom's policy, a printout of the interview transcript. I placed everything in a folder. I told my team I had a family matter to take care of. They did not ask questions. They trusted me. The morning of the reunion, I stood in my living room staring at the television. The network had replayed my interview, this time with a banner at the bottom calling me a rising figure in sustainable agriculture. My picture filled the screen. My face. My own face. Alive. Present. Somewhere in Cedar Ridge, that same image might be replaying. Somewhere, someone might be staring in disbelief. And somewhere, he and Olivia might be scrambling for explanations. I turned off the television, grabbed my keys, and felt a strange calm settle into my bones. For the first time in my life, I was choosing the moment, the place, the truth. I walked out the door knowing exactly what I intended to do, and knowing that when I walked into that reunion, nothing would ever be the same again. I pulled out of my driveway before the sun was fully up. The sky still that soft, muted blue that makes the world feel quiet, suspended, almost forgiving. The road to Cedar Ridge had not changed much in 10 years. The same bends, the same long stretches of open field, the same clusters of trees leaning in toward the highway as if they were watching. The cars pass, and trying to remember the faces inside them. I drove with the windows cracked just enough to let the cool air slip in. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my stomach thudded in a slow, heavy rhythm that reminded me I was heading straight toward the life that had once turned its back on me. I expected nerves, or maybe doubt, but what I felt was something colder, clearer. It was not anger anymore. It was a kind of calm resolve, the kind that settles in when you have nothing left to lose and everything left to tell. By the time I reached the edge of Cedar Ridge, the morning had brightened. People were out walking their dogs. The bakery on Main Street had a line forming, just like it always did on weekends. And there it was, the familiar sign for the Carter residence turnoff. My chest tightened, just slightly, as I took the right turn and followed the long gravel road to the house I grew up in. His truck was parked at the front, clean and polished as always. A row of cars lined the driveway. Too many to count. Family from out of town, I guessed. Maybe neighbors. Maybe people who used to smile at me when I was little and then never bothered to. Wonder where I went. I parked along the tree line and turned off the engine. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the ticking sound of the cooling engine. The house looked the same. Same porch, same shutters, same front door that used to slam shut behind me when I ran in after school. Somehow that sameness made everything feel stranger, like time had frozen here, while the rest of my life kept moving without permission. I reached over to the passenger seat, grabbed the folder I had assembled with Rachel, and slipped it into my bag. Then I stepped out. Voices carried across the yard, laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of people gathered too closely. I walked up the steps and paused at the front door. It stood open, like always during gatherings. A breeze drifted through the entryway, carrying the faint smell of barbecue and something floral. Maybe Olivia's perfume. She always liked to make an entrance, even when she was not in the spotlight. I stepped inside. The living room was full. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people from his church group, neighbors I vaguely recognized. They filled the couches and stood in clusters near the windows, talking, drink iced tea and lemonade. And there, on the wall opposite the entrance, the television was on. A financial news channel. The volume is low but audible. And then I saw it. My face. My interview from Denver. The same segment that had run earlier that week. Me sitting in the studio, smiling slightly, looking about Horizon Agrologics, as if my past had been nothing more than a footnote in someone else's life. The chyron beneath the video said, "Young entrepreneur reshapes agricultural logistics." And then my name. Mia Hayden. A ripple of movement passed through the room as people followed each other's gazes, first to the screen, then to me, then back again. It was like watching a wave hit a shoreline in slow motion. A kind of stunned recognition spread across faces. Some people leaned forward. Others straightened in their seats. A few blinked hard, as if trying to make sense of what they were seeing. I stood there quietly, letting the room breathe in the shock. And then someone near the back whispered what I knew so many others were thinking. Is that really her? He was standing near the center of the room, one hand wrapped around a glass of iced tea, his postures stiff. He heard the whisper and turned toward the television. His glass slipped slightly in his grip. I watched the moment he recognized my face on the screen. A quick tightening of his jaw, a flicker of disbelief, then something else behind his eyes. Something closer to fear. Just then, the host's voice on the television said, "Mia Hayden, founder of Horizon Agrologics, one of the most promising young innovators in sustainable agriculture. Her work is changing the way farmers do business across the Midwest." And when the camera cut to a close-up of me speaking, the room turned completely silent. Even the air felt still, waiting. I stepped forward into that silence. "Hey, Dad. Miss me?" The glass in his hand slipped from his fingers and hit the carpet with a muted thud, spilling iced tea that seeped quickly into the beige fibers. His eyes locked onto mine, wide and unsteady. A red flush crept up his neck, settling across his cheeks like a rising tide of panic. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Across the room, Olivia's face went pale. Her hand flew to her chest. She looked between me and the screen, her mouth forming a perfect circle of horror. For someone who always knew what to say, she suddenly seemed unable to find a single word. Aunt Marcy was the first to speak. Her voice cut through the silence, trembling, but clear enough that everyone heard it. "But Mia is alive. So why did you tell everyone she was dead?" Heads turned to my dad, and suddenly, a dozen voices rose, overlapping, questions spilling into the room without pause. "Why would you say that? What happened? Did you know she was alive? Why wasn't anyone told? Was there an accident? What is going on?" He tried to steady himself, raising his hand slightly as if he could calm the rising storm. His voice cracked on the first attempt, and when he finally managed to speak, it came out thin and unconvincing. There was a misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding. No one bought it. My Uncle David stepped forward, eyes narrowed. He looked straight at my dad and said what everyone else was too stunned to articulate. A misunderstanding does not create a death announcement. A misunderstanding does not explain why you held a memorial service for your daughter. So tell us, what did you do? My dad's face was drained of color. His mouth opened again, searching for something plausible to offer, something that would make him look like a man caught in confusion, rather than a man caught in a lie. But the words wouldn't come. I took another step forward. Not dramatic, just enough to bring myself clearly into view. They declared me dead 10 years ago. Without a body, without proof, without ever trying to contact me. There were gasps. A few people covered their mouths. Someone near the window whispered that they remembered attending the memorial, that they had cried for me. Olivia tried to speak. "Mia, you do not understand." But when she stepped forward, her legs seemed unsteady, her voice shaky, and the room did not give her the space she wanted. My cousin shook her head at her and said, "We saw your post, the black and white picture, the caption, gone but never forgotten. Were you lying too?" Olivia's eyes darted toward him, silently pleading for him to take control, to say something that would rescue them both. But he looked frozen, pinned beneath the weight of everyone's expectations and suspicions. Someone else spoke up, one of his longtime church friends. Her voice was sharp, almost cutting. If Mia is alive, then who did we bury? Why did you take donations for a memorial fund? A fresh round of murmurs erupted. Words like fraud and deception drifted through the air. His shoulders hunched, his composure slipping through his fingers like water. I could have stayed. I could have unleashed every document in my bag and forced him to answer every question. But that was never my goal. The truth was already burning through the room, catching fire all on its own. I did not need to add more fuel. All I had to do was let it breathe. So I stood there one last time, letting my eyes sweep across the faces of people who had once believed lies about it. Me. People who had mourned me, ignored me, dismissed me. People who now looked at me as if seeing a ghost that had come home to ask for answers they were not prepared to give. I said quietly, I came here so everyone could see the truth for themselves. You can decide what to do with it. He finally managed to step forward, his voice cracking like dry wood as he reached out a hand toward me. Mia, please, you do not understand. But I did understand, more than he ever realized. And the room around us understood too. The collective recognition that something too deliberate, too cold, too intentional had been done to me, and people who once admired him were now looking at him with suspicion and disappointment, maybe even pity. I took a step back from him, letting that distance speak louder than anything I could say. He froze in place, his hands still suspended midair, his fingers trembling. I turned toward the door. Behind me, chaos grew. Voices rose in accusation. Questions cornered him. Olivia's voice cracked as she tried to talk over them. Someone demanded to know whether Mom had really known what happened. Someone else asked why the police had not been involved. The living room filled with tension thick enough to choke on. I walked through the entryway without looking back. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard one last question ring out behind me, loud and sharp. If she is alive, who signed the death certificate? The door closed behind me. Outside, the sun sat high overhead, warm against my skin. For the first time in 10 years, I felt the weight of Cedar Ridge not pressing on my ribs, but lifting off of them, like dust shaken from an old coat I no longer needed. I walked toward my car, hearing the muffled noise inside the house rise into a frantic swell, but I did not turn back. I drove away from Cedar Ridge with the windows cracked open, letting the warm air rush across my face. I expected relief or triumph, or something sharp and electric, but what I felt was quieter, a steadiness, a knowing. The truth was finally out in the open. The collapse had begun, and now the rest would unfold in the one place where excuses could not survive: a courthouse. Within a week of the reunion, everything accelerated. Rachel called to tell me that multiple people from the gathering had reached out, asking how they could provide statements. Screenshots of their texts filled her inbox. Copies of the memorial bulletin, photos from the service held 10 years earlier, stories about what my dad and Olivia told them back then. One woman said she had donated money for my memorial floral arrangement and wanted to know where it had really gone. Another said she remembered Olivia crying dramatically at church, looking about how short life was and how I had died too young. All of it made my stomach twist. But each message strengthened the case. Then came the official word from the State Insurance Commission. They had opened an investigation. They requested all relevant documents from him. Rachel forwarded me the formal notice. It was short, direct, and carried the weight of something irreversible. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from an unknown number. His voice, shaky and strained, spilled into my phone. Mia, please, call me back. We can fix this. You do not have to do this. I deleted the message without listening again. Within 2 months, the investigation advanced into civil court. Fraud. False declarations. Misrepresentation of a death for financial gain. All woven tightly into a case that Rachel handled with quiet precision. She did not exaggerate. She did not dramatize. She simply laid out facts, dates, documents, testimonies. His attorney tried to argue confusion, grief, miscommunication, but the evidence was layered and consistent. Olivia's social media posts, his handwritten submission to the insurance company claiming I had died in an out-of-state car accident, a fabricated police incident number, a pastor's statement recalling his detailed account of my last moments, false details, manufactured details, all pointing in one direction. The hearing took place on a cloudy morning in early October. I sat beside Rachel at the long wooden table in the courtroom. The air smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. People filed into the benches behind us, including several relatives and community members who had attended the reunion. Some nodded to me quietly. Others avoided eye contact, unsure where the lines of loyalty and truth fell. I felt none of it as deeply as I thought I would. Mostly, I just felt a strange distance, like I was observing a story I had once belonged to but no longer lived inside. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Olivia and he sat at the opposite table. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders pulled inward, his once confident posture now weighed down by something heavier than age. Olivia clutched a tissue, her eyes red, her makeup carefully done but already smudging at the corners. The judge reviewed the case file calmly, flipping through documents that represented a decade of lies. Then she asked the Insurance Commission investigator to summarize the findings. The investigator stood and spoke with clinical clarity. She detailed how the insurance payout had been adjusted after receiving a written declaration that I was deceased. She explained that no death certificate existed in state records. She pointed out inconsistencies between his account and actual state accident reports. She highlighted Olivia's posts, the church bulletin, and testimonies from people who attended the fictional memorial. Then she stated the commission's conclusion. The deceased beneficiary was, in fact, alive. No evidence supported the claim of death. The documentation submitted was knowingly false. He shifted in his seat. Olivia's lips trembled. Then Rachel stood. She presented my proof of life, employment records, apartment leases, tax filings, photos, phone records, statements from coworkers who knew me long after the supposed date of death. She explained, calmly and without theatrics, how an entire narrative had been constructed to eliminate me from legal and financial existence. When she finished, the courtroom felt colder. The judge turned to him and asked if he had anything to say. He rose slowly, gripping the table for support. His voice was rough, thin. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone. She left. She broke ties. She walked away from the family. I believed she would not come back. The policy needed clarity. The judge interrupted, asking him directly whether he had knowingly reported a living person as deceased. He hesitated. A long, painful hesitation. Olivia stared at him, willing him to find an answer that could save them both. He finally said he had been under stress, that Mom's death had been overwhelming, that he had made decisions he did not fully understand. The judge pressed again. Did you knowingly submit false information? His eyes flicked toward me then, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his expression. Shame. Fear, maybe recognition, but it vanished just as quickly, swallowed by the weight of consequences he could no longer control. He answered softly, yes. A ripple moved through the room. The judge adjusted her glasses and began reading her ruling. The declaration of death was invalid and fraudulent. The insurance payout made under the false assumption of my death was to be reversed. Olivia and he were ordered to return the full amount plus additional penalties. The court imposed a civil fine for fraudulent misrepresentation. And because the insurance company had already indicated they would pursue their own action, they would face further inquiry. Finally, the judge addressed the moral dimension. Carefully, but unmistakably. She said the court could not undo the emotional harm caused by the fabrication of a death, but it could acknowledge that such actions distorted truth, damaged community trust, and violated the basic expectation of honesty that underpins legal and financial systems. He sat down heavily. Olivia collapsed into quiet sobs. The tissue in her hand tore slightly as she pressed it against her nose. I felt no triumph. No rush of victory, only the steady unfolding of something that had long been inevitable. After the ruling, people began filing out of the courtroom. Several relatives approached me with soft apologies. They said they had believed what they were told, that they wished they had reached out, that they couldn't understand why he had done it. I listened, nodded politely, but I did not offer comfort. It was not mine to give. Rachel gathered her papers while I stood near the back of the room, letting the weight of the verdict settle. Money did not heal anything. Legal rulings did not fix the fractures inside a family. But consequences mattered, and accountability, even cold and quiet, had its place. He approached me slowly. He looked older than I remembered, lines deeper around his eyes, shoulders sunken. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Olivia reached him and tugged at his sleeve as if urging him away. He whispered something to her, shook her off gently, and tried again. "Mia, I did not mean for things to go this far." The words floated between us, hollow. I waited, not because I expected an apology, but because I wanted to hear what truth he thought he could shape now, when the shaping narrative was no longer in his control. He swallowed and said, "I lost your mom. I could not lose the rest of the family, too." There it was. The justification, wrapped in grief, the kind of explanation that sidestepped responsibility while trying to claim suffering as a shield. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only answer that does not give away more than is deserved. He took a step back, defeated. Not by me, but by his own choices. As he turned away, I saw someone from the church approach him, their expression tight. They spoke quietly, something about leadership roles and community trust. Dad's face fell further. Another couple approached Olivia, their voices icy, telling her they could not support someone who had participated in fraud. Reputation was crumbling around them, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way that lasts longer than outrage. Outside the courthouse, the sky was beginning to clear. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, feeling it expand into the empty spaces inside my chest. Rachel joined me, handing me a copy of the ruling. She asked how I felt. I took my time answering. I told her it felt like the truth had finally caught up. Nothing more, nothing less. She nodded, satisfied. Then she asked if I was ready for what came next. I looked out across the parking lot, where my dad and Olivia walked separately toward their cars, shoulders slumped. No one beside them. The consequences had begun, and they would continue, whether I watched or not. I told Rachel yes. I walked down the courthouse steps, feeling the weight inside my chest shift into something steadier, something that finally let me stand upright without bracing for impact. The October air felt cooler than it had earlier that morning, crisp enough to clear the last remnants of adrenaline from my system. I did not look back at my dad or at Olivia. Their voices faded into the background of the parking lot, swallowed by the sound of traffic on the main road. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me as mine, not borrowed, not stolen from, not taken out from under me. The insurance company sent the formal notice of restitution 2 weeks later, a wired deposit, a letter confirming the reversal. No celebration, no balloons, no sense of victory. The money was not a prize. It was a restoration of something meant for me, something my mom had chosen out of love, not something I had fought to steal. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the numbers in my account, feeling a mixture of gratitude toward her and the quiet ache of knowing she was not here to see it. I closed the laptop and whispered, "Thank you, Mom," into the stillness of my home. The next morning, I took a long walk through the fields behind my neighborhood. Colorado mornings have a way of wrapping themselves around you. The smell of pine, the hum of distant traffic mixing with birdsong. I had spent so long shrinking myself to stay safe, to stay hidden, to avoid the sharp edges of my past. But now that the truth was exposed, now that the world knew I was alive and not a shadow someone invented, something inside me took its first full breath in a decade. I was no longer someone's erased daughter. I was myself again. But reclaiming my life did not mean reclaiming the people who had once belonged to it. He called once after the ruling, a short and strained voicemail, asking if we could talk. I deleted it without playing the rest. I had given him everything he needed to know in my silence at the reunion and in the courtroom. There was nothing more to say. Olivia tried to reach out as well. Long, rambling messages filled with excuses and confusion, as if rewriting history in her own voice might soften what had been done. I let them sit unread. I was done carrying their guilt, their fear, their choices. Sometimes closure is not a conversation. Sometimes it is simply walking away without taking their story with you. Horizon Agrologics moved into a bigger office that winter. My team celebrated with homemade chili and cornbread at one of the conference tables. They talked about our upcoming expansion into Kansas, about partnering with a new chain of farm supply stores, about how the interview had boosted visibility more than any marketing campaign had ever tried. I sat with them, smiling, feeling a warmth I had not felt in years. This was my family now, in the truest sense of the word. People who showed up. People who told the truth. People who did not vanish when things became complicated. People who built something with me instead of tearing something away. One evening, after a long day at the office, I found myself pausing outside a mirror in the hallway. My reflection stopped me for a moment. My hair pulled back loosely. My eyes are a little tired, but steady. My jaw set with a confidence I had never seen in myself at 18. And behind it all, one thought settled in deeply. I had taken my name back. Not just legally, not just through records or rulings. I had reclaimed the part of me he tried to bury, the part he tried to reduce to silence and shadows. I had taken back my existence, my place in the world, my right to be seen and heard. And that, more than anything that happened in court, was the real ending. Still, part of me wondered about the aftermath. Cedar Ridge is a small place, and gossip travels faster than wildfire. I heard from my aunt that he rarely left the house anymore. People at church had stopped asking him to lead committees or prayer groups. Some avoided him in the aisles of the grocery store. The insurance investigation triggered an internal audit of his employment records at the construction company where he had worked for years. They placed him on indefinite leave. His reputation, once the cornerstone of every room he entered, was gone. Olivia returned to her job at the bank, but things were not the same. Clients withdrew their accounts. Coworkers treated her politely but cautiously. She had always been the golden child, the one who smiled and charmed and floated through life with ease. Now she walked through town with her shoulders pulled inward, eyes glancing downward, as if she wished no one remembered her role in all of it. I did not feel satisfied, only distance. Karma did not need applause. It simply needed space to do the work truth had already begun. One afternoon in early spring, about 6 months after the ruling, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with his handwriting. I was wrong. I hope someday you can forgive me. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Forgiveness is not something you give because someone asks for it. It is something you choose because you are ready. And I was not ready, but I also was not angry anymore. Just done. The biggest change happened quietly, on a day without significance. I woke up one morning and realized that for the first time in my life, my past was not the heaviest part of me. My story had unfolded, unraveled, and rebuilt itself in ways I could never have predicted at 18. I had survived being erased. I had survived loss and exile and false death. I had survived betrayal and silence. And somehow, on the other side, I found myself not smaller, but larger. I took a weekend off work and drove into the mountains alone. The road curved upward through winding passes, the tall pines lining the slopes like guardians watching over old secrets. When I reached a lookout point with a view stretching miles across the valley, I stepped out and let the wind hit my face. I whispered into the open air that I was still here. Those words mattered more to me than anything a judge could say. Months passed. The horizon grew. My life has steadied. The people who mattered stayed close. The people who broke me stayed far away. And every now and then, someone would email to say they had seen my interview, that my work inspired them, that they wanted to build something meaningful too. Those messages always felt like tiny lanterns lighting a path forward. I realized then that rebuilding a life is not about erasing what happened. It is about choosing what comes next. And so here I am, telling this story not because of what I lost, but because of what I reclaimed. My name, my dignity, my existence. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.